This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, still I don't see our chair, vice chair, or secretary, but I think we can get started. Um, First is introductions, and I'll just do what we've been doing recently. I'll call off names that I see on the screen. If you could just indicate what community you're from, that'd be great. I'll go over staff first. I'm Brian Doherty from MRPC. Sherry?
Here.
Tyler Godin.
Here.
Grace Belmont.
Hi, everybody. I'm with MRPC. I work in the transportation department.
Amanda Reed.
Amanda Reed Lunenburg.
Guy Corbacero.
Guy Corbacero, Winchington.
Sarah Bradbury.
Sarah Bradbury, MassDOT District 3.
Richard Kilhart.
Dick Kilhart, Athol, DPW, Town of Athol.
Brian Doheny.
Town of Ashburnham.
George Snow.
Yep.
George is with MRPC. Elizabeth Wood.
Elizabeth Wood, Leominster Planning and Development.
Janet Tice.
Hi there, Shirley Planning Board.
Nick Erickson.
Nick Erickson, City of Fitchburg.
Laura Schifrin.
Laura Schifrin, Planning Board, Townsend.
George Kahali.
George Kahali, Mart.
And I see just one more person. It shows up on my screen as S, but I don't see a name. If everyone could just put their names in and also their affiliation, that'll be helpful. For when we do minutes and everything like that, and to give people an indication who you are and who's here. Can I ask who is S? It shows up as SII. Okay. Well, if maybe we can circle back on that later. In any event, are there any public comments? We'll move on to item 2. Hearing none. Approval of October 9th minutes. And we really do everything on consensus here, so there won't be any formal votes, but we'll ask for a motion to accept the minutes of October 9th.
Guy Corbacero, I move to accept the minutes of October 9th.
I'll second Laura Schifrin, Townsend.
Okay, great. Any discussion? Hearing none. We'll consider this consensus acceptance of the minutes of October 9th. Which brings us to item 4. And I can start us off on this, but this is basically continuing our effort to inform members of JTC of some of the things that we do outside of the federal required documents that we put together, just to give you an indication of some of the transportation planning type of work we do throughout the program year. In this case, Tyler Godin from our staff will present the housing coordination plan that he put together this year. And just like everything else, this looks at housing coordination through a transportation lens. So the idea really for this type of plan or report is to inform our long-range planning process. So we try to develop trends and identify trends in the region that may inform our decision making in projects, priorities, and long-range planning recommendations. So this is one of many things that go into that type of decision making. So with that being said, and I will also mention in the handouts, there's a full copy of this report as well as the presentation from today. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to Tyler. And Tyler, I'll give you access to share your screen.
All right, great.
make presenter. It should work.
Yep, looks like it worked. Let's see. Can people see that?
Looks good. It's not in presentation mode, but we can see it.
Okay, hold on, let me change that view then. Okay, I'll just share my whole screen. Can you see that now? Presentation mode.
Yep, looks good.
And does it work when I slide through?
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Okay, just making sure. Perfect. Okay, so today I'll be going over the housing coordination plan, which, like Brian said, we produced in our most previous program year. So this was finalized in September of 2024. And so the point of this presentation is really to hit the highlights and some of the main themes that came out of the report. And like Brian said, if you want to read the full report, it's available in the handouts that were sent out. And the map that you're looking at on the right just shows the existing dense residential housing developments in the region. And this is an important map as it's, one of the main components that we looked at for this plan. And just looking at it, you can immediately see that there's a high concentration in Fitchburg, Leominster, Gardner, the cities. Not too many real surprises there. But then you also have some a high concentration in Clinton. You have some scattered through Shirley, Aaron, Groton, as well as throughout the rest of the region. So that's just to give you an idea of where these dense housing developments exist. And then just some quick background how this plan came about. This really came about through the bipartisan infrastructure law, which encourages the consideration of housing in the metropolitan transportation planning process. It suggested that MPOs create a housing coordination plan to take into consideration housing and employment when making transportation improvements. And by creating this plan, it should encourage smart growth. A key component of smart growth is transportation. It should encourage transit-oriented development, and we'll kind of talk about that a little bit more as we go on. Like I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the MBTA communities. That's a form of transit-oriented development, which most of our communities have to be compliant with. First and last mile, most people aren't comfortable walking, a half mile or even a quarter mile to their final destination or to the transit stop from their house. So just making transit more accessible in general. And then another, what this plan aims to do is develop regional goals for the integration of housing, transportation, and economic development strategies, and to identify the location of existing and planned housing and employment developments. And by looking at the existing transportation options and transit options, we're able to identify the gaps that connect housing and employment centers, as well as goods and services. And for the purpose of this plan, when we say goods and services, we're talking about like hospitals, medical clinics, as well as shopping centers, sort of the necessities that people need to get to in their everyday lives. And this plan is broken up into 5 sections. First, the background / introduction, which we kind of just went over, housing, regional transit / transportation, and then we looked at connecting housing and transportation, and finally recommendations. So this slide goes over housing a bit, and the table on the left shows housing unit production by community. The community in our region that produced the most housing units as a percent of their total units within the time period we're looking at here, 2010 to 2020, was Lunenburg. They produced 14% of their total units within this time period. Royalston and Westminster also had really high rates of housing production, over 10%. Athol, Fitchburg, and Phillipston produced the least over this time period. Phillipston was only 0.7%. And as a whole, the Montachusett region produced 5% of their total housing units within this time period, which is lower than the Massachusetts rate of 6.3%. Within the report, we looked at population change as well, and we compared that to these housing production numbers. And what we found was that every community within our region, actually, their housing production rates exceeded their percent population growth, which is good to see. And we also looked at the vacancy rates within the region. Gardner, Sterling, Townsend, they all had the lowest rates, less than 4%. Peterson, Phillipston, Royalston, they all had the highest rates, greater than 15%. And as I'm sure you are all aware, these are three of our smallest communities in the region. They're all in the western part of the region. So yeah, and it's interesting to note that none of them have any access to transit. Then we looked at housing programs by community. The first housing program that we're looking at here is if our communities have a current housing production plan. And as you can see, only 6 of our communities currently have housing production plans. And you can see that a lot of our communities have expired housing production plans. That's largely because housing production plans only last 5 years before they expire. And it's also important to note that the communities that don't have either a current housing production plan or expired production plan, those are the larger communities, the 3 cities, as well as Clinton and Winchendon. And then looking at which of our communities have a 40R district, you can see only 2 of our communities have a 40R district, that being Fitchburg and Lunenburg. And 40R districts, they encourage high density housing developments. And then housing choice communities, only 1 of our communities are a designated housing choice community, and that's Air. So the Housing Choice Initiative rewards communities that produce certain rates of new housing units within the last 5 years. And they also have to adopt best practices related to housing production. And this is a really good designation to have, as it opens you up to additional funding sources. This gives you access to the Housing Choice Community Grants. AIR has received, I believe, 2 within the last 5 years. And just as an example of what you can use the grant money for, AIR used one of their grants in part to create ADA compliant sidewalks and traffic calming parking. And then the final column shows which of our communities are designated MBTA communities. As you can see, more than half of them are designated MBTA communities. And so this is a new law that I'm sure a lot of you are aware of that requires communities to have at least 1 district of reasonable size in which multifamily housing is allowed by right. And they need to have a density minimum of 15 units per acre. And this is theoretically a form of transit-oriented development. But as you can see, there are some smaller communities in here, like Ashby and Ashburnham right at the top, that are designated MBTA communities that, sure, they're adjacent to a community with a commuter rail, but don't really have reasonable access to transit. So I think it's important to consider these communities in future transit developments, especially as they become fully compliant with the new law, and you see some of that development start to take place. So this slide goes over age in the region, and this is kind of an interesting trend that came out of the report, which is somewhat unique to our region. As you can see, our region is aging at a rate almost 3 times that of the state, and our median age is 4 years higher than that of the state. And some of our communities are aging just at an incredibly rapid rate. Between 2012 and 2022, some of our communities aged, their median age increased by over 7 years. You can see Ashby, Shirley, and Sterling aged over 7 years within that time. And of course, aging populations require additional services such as transportation services. So this is an important factor that needs to be taken into consideration in future transit developments. And the 3 oldest communities, Ashby, Petersham, and Sterling, they have no form of transit. So again, just another reason to consider this for future transit developments. I just wanted to note that previously we had mentioned that Lunenburg had the highest housing production rate, and I just think it's an interesting correlation to see that they were one of the few communities that their median age actually decreased during that time period. And then we looked at the regional transportation system within the region. 14 of the 22 MRPC communities have some form of transit within them. On the next slide, we'll give a breakdown community by community and what transit options those communities have. The communities without transit are Ashburnham, Ashby, Groton, Hubbardston, Peterson, Phillipston, Royalston, and Sterling. And if you remember from the last slide, a lot of these communities are designated MBTA communities. And part of identifying the gaps in the transit services, we analyzed the transit access to dense housing developments, major employers, and goods and services. And the transit services we looked at for this analysis were the MART routes, specifically the fixed routes and the regional bus routes, as well as the 5 MBTA commuter rail stops. And so this is the table that I mentioned before. Like I said, 14 of the 22 communities have some form of transit. I think I mentioned already which communities don't have transit. Mostly the smaller communities, but there are some, like Groton, that is one of, they have some dense housing developments there, and they're kind of in that mid-sized community. And it's important to note that there are 3 communities that are MRPC communities but are outside of the MART service area. So Groton, for example, they are not within the MART service area. They are serviced by the Lowell Regional Transit Authority. And then we looked at connecting housing and transportation. So the table shows dense housing developments, and when we're looking at dense housing developments, we're talking about the housing developments with 8 or more units and their access to transit. And what this table shows is basically which communities have adequate access to transit. The lower the number, the better those communities are serviced. So the lower the percent on the right, the better access those communities have to transit. So as you can see, the cities all have excellent access to transit, as well as Westminster. Only 5% of Fitchburg's dense housing developments don't have adequate access to transit, so they aren't within. So that only 5% aren't within half a mile of a transit stop. And then on the other hand, you have a lot of communities that don't have any of their dense housing developments with adequate access to transit. And I believe the community that has the most is Clinton, with 37 dense housing developments, and none of them have adequate access to transit. And then looking at the region as a whole, a third, or 33% of the housing developments are located further than half a mile of the nearest transit stop. And this just better displays, gives you a visual representation of where the housing developments are and where the transit lines are. So the blue shows the MART routes, and then the purple shows the MBTA commuter lines, and then the green dots, of course, show the where the dense housing developments are located. And as you can see, you've got that large concentration within Clinton with no transit routes going through there. And then moving on to recommendations, our first recommendation is to identify ways to encourage transit-oriented development. As we mentioned, there are some communities like Fitchburg and Lunenburg that have the 40R district, which largely encourages transit-oriented development. And many of our communities have to abide by the MBTA communities law, which is a form of transit-oriented development. And then another recommendation was to increase mixed-use development. A major goal of this plan and just transit development in general is connecting people to employment, and encouraging mixed-use development will certainly help connect housing to employment. Increasing the rural transit options. As we've seen, the cities in our region are already well serviced by transit. It's really like the mid-sized communities in our region, like Groton, Clinton Air, these communities that have a good amount of dense housing developments, but not a lot of transit. They're really the ones that are disproportionately serviced. Identifying housing and demographic trends in the region, and adjust services accordingly. As we mentioned, a major trend that came out of this report was just the age in our region and how rapidly we're aging. And that ties into the rural transit options. A lot of the rural communities are really aging at a much more rapid pace. Towns like Ashburnham, Ashby, and Sterling, they're also likely to experience a large growth in multifamily housing development due to the MBTA Communities Act. And yeah, that is the recommendations we have, and I believe that takes us to the end of the presentation. Are there any questions or comments?
Yeah, this is Janet Tice from Shirley. I have a question for you, Tyler, and that's regarding the aging of our. Shirley was one of the communities that you said was aging the fastest. Is that because we actually have our population is actually older, or that we just have fewer children?
That's a good question, which I can't say for certain with
Do you know
Shirley,
how
but I
that
think.
that figure was arrived at?
What was the question?
How did you arrive at the aging
Well, that just
data?
compared I believe for that it was the 2012 median age versus the 2022 median age. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it's a function of smaller families or no children in, childless
Right.
families. I mean,
Yeah, and
our school census has dropped as well.
you're right, and I think that's representative of a lot of the more rural communities. I see there's a few hands up. Nick?
Thanks, Tyler. I saw on one of the early slides with the table that showed housing production rates. I think I saw a footnote that said that the period that was looked at was 2010 to 2020.
Yeah.
Was there any looking at housing production over the past 4 years? I know Fitchburg's had a few larger housing developments that have actually gone to completion in that time period as opposed to 2010 to 2020.
Right. No, we didn't look at more recent dates, and the only reason we chose these dates was to compare it between some of the data that came from the decennial census, just to keep it consistent with that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Grace?
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of elaborate a little bit on the population thing. So it is true that nationally there is a decrease in birth rates, but there also the baby boom population is moving through the aging population. So we see this trend actually throughout nationally, and towns where you may say exceptions are towns that maybe have a higher immigrant population, and that are, closer suburban, that have, good schools and things like that, that are bringing younger families in. But it is a national trend, and you will see this bubble going throughout. So in terms of housing planning and transportation planning, taking a strong consideration of the aging population is really important.
Yeah, thank you for that, Grace. George?
Yes, I noticed in your report you saying there are no transit service in Phillipston, but we do.
Um,
From your map, you see the bus route go through.
right. The
If
map
you
may be misleading. And I'm not an expert on all the routes, but does it pass through Phillipston with a stop, or does it just pass through Phillipston?
no, was a stop.
Okay. And it's also important to note that just for the sake of our analysis, we didn't look at every route. We looked at the fixed routes and the regional routes. So I'm not sure if that is why, or if that might have just been a mistake on our part.
I think it is just overlooked.
Right.
It
Okay.
is
Well,
there's a fixed bus route on the G-Link between Gardner and Atoll, and been running for several years, and we have ridership, and we have stop in Phillipston.
I think that's probably likely overlooked on our part, just because when we're looking at the transit, it was in relation to where the dense housing developments were. And if I remember correctly, I don't think Phillipston had any. So it was likely overlooked on our part due to that.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, George.
If you can correct it, please.
Yeah, no problem. Janet, did you have another question or?
Yeah, I did. I wondered if you could add a little bit of detail to what you had to say about the housing choice community and how we might become one and what the benefits of that would be.
So I know you have to apply for it. I'm not an expert on it, but I know it requires an application process and you have to produce a certain rate of housing units within the last 5 years. There's definitely a huge benefit of doing it I know Air, for example, they only became designated within the last 5 years, and they've already received 2 grants.
Wow.
And I think each of them were above $100,000. One might have even been a little bit more than that. So yeah, that's about what I can give you on that. So, like I said, I'm not an expert, but definitely some huge benefits behind it.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Yeah, George.
All right.
I don't know if this is the time to do that, or the transit update, because you're talking about the towns, which one has transit services. We just start the new services in Ashburnham and in Ashby just last month. We start a new service. I will talk about it in the transit section. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. This was written in September, so I know that those are very new services, but yeah, I think it's great that you're adding it to a lot of these communities that didn't have transit options before, and a lot of them are the MBTA communities. So hopefully they're able to sustain these transit services long term. Thanks, George.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, if there's any other questions on this housing production plan going forward, you can reach out to Tyler. And as I mentioned, this is something that we developed in the past year, and we plan on updating it periodically to see where the trends are, and ultimately it'll inform some of our goal setting and long range plans. So thank you, Tyler. And you should be able to see the agenda now, and I'll move forward to item 5. The Federal Fiscal Year 2025 to 29 Transportation Improvement Program, Amendment Number 1. So this is our first amendment for the current TIP. The MPO at its last meeting on October 30th released this amendment for a 21-day public comment period. It's on the transit side of Federal Fiscal Year 25. And currently it's out for public comment, as I mentioned. There's a information sheet here which describes what the change is, what the proposed amendment is. It's relatively easy. You can see the first highlighted item below. It's tough to see because it's kind of small, but this is the line item affected. Basically, they're asking to use funds from a previous grant in the amount of $375,000, along with a local match provided by MART of $325,000, to add it to that first line item to double the cost of that project from where it currently is at $700,000 up to $1.4 million to allow them to purchase an additional bus. So the way it's currently stated right now on the active tip is $700,000 for one 30-foot bus replacement. They're asking to move some funds from a previous grant along with the match to double that amount, purchase 2 buses in an effort to keep the fleet in a state of good repair. This is up for public comment, and as we typically do, we entertain any comments from this group or recommendation to the NPO, who will meet next week to endorse this. Staff does recommend endorsement. With that being said, if there's any questions on this, I can attempt to answer them. Are there any questions? Do we have consensus to recommend endorsement by the MPO at next week's meeting?
Yes.
George Kahali?
Yes.
Okay, and again, we don't have to take a formal vote, but could I consider? I will consider this consensus among the group to for MPO endorsement at next week's meeting.
Hey, Brian, I've got my hand raised.
Oh, okay. Hi, Nick. Sorry about that.
No worries. I just a question, I guess, for Mart. I'm wondering if there's anything being done to address some of the recent accidents that Mart has had with their buses.
Yes, we are considering some protection at our facilities for at the bus stops at the intermodal, and we are working on it to install some barriers.
Okay, thanks, George, and thanks, Nick. And if there's any follow-up questions related to any of that, you can reach out to us or Mart. As for this item, I'll consider consensus for the MPO to endorse this amendment number 1.
I don't consent to that on behalf of City of Fitchburg.
Okay. Well, I think what I'd like to do is take a formal vote, if that's the case. So our recommendation, or what we're looking for is a motion to recommend the MPO endorse. if we get a motion and second, and we can have some discussion after that, and then I can go through the list, and we can take a formal vote if that's okay.
I move to endorse, just to make a motion, Guy Corbacero.
I'll second
We have a
it.
second.
Yeah.
Okay, Laura. So any discussion? I know. Is there any discussion on this?
I'd like to hear what Fitchburg has to say, please.
Sure.
And then I have a question as well.
Okay, great. Nick, do you have anything to add?
I just have some concern with such a large amount of money going to fund new buses when there's issues with current buses being damaged needlessly. Mart's been all over us to try to install bus shelters throughout the city of Fitchburg using DPW resources that we don't have. We've pushed back a little bit on that, but who's to say we don't install a bus shelter and then next thing you know, there's an accident and someone's getting injured at one of these bus shelters. So with the limited resources that the city of Fitchburg has, I could find many ways to spend that money on behalf of the city of Fitchburg to improve infrastructure and other transportation that we have going on in the city. I don't see the need to be giving such a high amount of funding to Mark for these buses. I see him driving around the city, and most of the time they've only got one or two people on them.
Brian, if I
Okay.
may.
Okay, Laura. Yep.
Yeah, just, I mean, I think if they need repaired, I don't have a problem with that, but I guess I don't have the history of this. So if George could explain just how many accidents have been happening and the results of them, what's brought us to this point, I guess, if you could explain.
Really, this is the first accident happened in the history of Mart, and it was maybe a driver error, human error, and for the fund, we want to purchase 2 buses, replace very, very old buses, and the prices came 700 each, and this is why we removed some fund from an old grant to purchase, to add to this item. It is not a new fund, it is just an old fund, and the only thing we can do is to purchase buses in these funds. The other issue, as I mentioned, we are going to be putting the Jersey barriers at the ITC where the buses stops, and other than that, I don't know if Nick has any other recommendation for us to do.
Okay, is there any other discussion?
Does Nick have anything to say about that?
I mean, the biggest concern that I have is this recent accident in Fitchburg. I mean, a bus drove into a building and severely injured a person, and then not a month later, there was another accident up at Montachusett Community College where a bus hit 3 people. That raises a red flag in my book, and I'm just questioning sending nearly $1.5 million to MART to replace these buses unless there's something being done to address these issues. I mean, in the city of Fitchburg, we have no shortage of need for vehicles and equipment. I don't have $1.5 million to go out and buy new plow trucks that I could use, but I can guarantee you that if any of my drivers hit, injured, and or damaged property like that, I wouldn't be getting any funding for new plow trucks. So I can't sit here without saying anything and raising this concern. And that's it. That's really all I have to say on it. I don't have anything more to add.
Okay, Amanda, you have your hand raised.
I do. I just want to echo what Nick is saying. Not on behalf of Lunenburg, but I do teach at Montachusett at the Leominster campus. And, we all got emails when that incident happened where the 3 students were hit. And it kind of evolved into a larger conversation with my students. I have many of them email me that they can't get to class because they can't get an Uber, they don't have a vehicle. And I ask, why don't you take a MART bus? And a lot of them say, well, the MART buses, the drivers are, kind of drive crazy. And so we don't feel comfortable taking them. I'm not saying that's the case with all of the MART drivers, but I do echo what Nick is saying because my students are a real example as to why, they can't really trust a MART driver to take him to class. And after what happened at the Gardner campus, it's like, that makes a lot of sense. So, I kind of agree with Nick on this.
Okay, and as I see them in order, George Kahali, your hand is raised next.
Oh, I'm still on. Really, I don't have anything to add except we
Okay.
are working and trying to make every stop safer.
Okay. Laura? Laura, you still
Well,
have your hand raised.
I think the concern is obviously for people's safety, and it is a lot of money. I mean, I can echo the same thing as far as every city and town probably in our region that we all do not have enough money um, to buy what we would like to buy. And the other thing that I know is, so the flip side would be that no prices are coming down. And so if we have prices today and we need vehicles, I mean, the human resources part of MART and who you hire and how they're performing has got to be addressed, obviously. And or there may be insurance claims, lawsuits. We certainly don't need that. That's going to be expensive. So hopefully measures are being taken for accountability on this. Other than that, I agree to the transfer only because it's only going to get more expensive in the future, but MART has to be more responsible with their drivers being accountable. That's all I have to say.
Okay, I see Grace.
Yeah, I just want to kind of bring focus and clarification. So if this amendment does not go through, these are funds, my understanding, that are already exist, and it's a way of using them in a useful way. This is not seeking new funds. It's simply moving funds from that are not being used and allocating them in a different direction. Is that correct?
Correct. Essentially reprioritizing where the funds are being spent.
So if these funds were not spent on getting a newer, more modern vehicle, what would happen to those funds?
I'll defer to George on that.
And they will stay in that fund and the other.
And be used for what? What would those funds go to instead?
It was an old fund from COVID for rehab facilities. Yeah.
Okay, I see both Gracie and Laura's hands still raised. If there's any other follow-up, um, I guess Laura.
Okay, so my concern would be the cost of items going up. And if I'm understanding you correctly, you said you would use it for a Harvard facility,
Rehab facilities,
a rehab facility. Is that to build one
or to improve one.
or to improve one? Well, then I guess it's up to the community as to what they think is more important. No matter what it is that you decide, it's going to cost more money in the future. So it may be sitting in this fund. Maybe it's been sitting in this fund for 5 years. So this amount of money, this 375,000, is certainly not worth what it was 5 years ago.
No,
Yet it's still sitting in the fund. So that's financially, that's where I would be coming from. Find a good purpose for it. It's already there. It's not going anywhere, but it also loses value the longer you hold it there. I don't think that you get a big bang for the buck in the bank, even though the interest rates have gone up in just this past year, certainly not for 5 years, not to keep up with inflation. That's it.
Okay, Ryan.
I just wanted to make, can you hear me?
Yep.
Just wanted to make a quick comment. With the concerns of safety, if this is, I understand what the story was. I would be concerned if there was this concern of safety with drivers, then pairing it with an older fleet of vehicles would just make it worse. So if the fleet of buses is in fact getting older, then I would imagine that this is an important thing to get newer, safer buses on the road. So just wanted to put that in the mix.
Okay, thank you. Chelsea.
Sorry, I put a question in the chat, but just wanted to get back to it. It was my understanding that Mart was trying to get away from the 30-foot buses and convert to some of the smaller vehicles. So just wanted to kind of ask why we're replacing 30-foot buses instead of looking at smaller vehicles.
We still need larger buses on our fleet because some bus routes has higher ridership and capacity.
Okay, I don't see anyone else's hands raised. If we're done with the discussion, then I can read through the roll. And as a reminder, we have a motion to recommend to the MPO that they endorse this amendment, which would increase that line item to allow purchase of 2 buses. So I'll go through the members I have on the list, and the ex officio members do not vote, so it'll just be the members from the communities that have been appointed. So I'll read through, and it is a majority vote. So again, we have a motion to recommend to the MPO that they endorse amendment number 1 to the federal fiscal year 2025 of the Transportation Improvement Program. And I'll read through the roll. Amanda Reed from Lunenburg.
Can I have a minute to think about it?
Sure. Guy Corbacero, Winchendon. Again, a yes would be to make the recommendation to endorse. A no would be not to.
As a previous driver of Mart, I recommend to approve this.
Okay. Brian Doheny, Ashburnham.
I recommend.
So that's a yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. Elizabeth Wood, Leominster.
Yes.
Janet Tice, Shirley,
I vote aye.
Dick Erickson, Fitchburg,
No.
Laura Schifrin, Townsend.
I'm going to vote aye with reservation. I think I'm going to want more information in the future as to the progress of what's going on. And I also feel that perhaps the 30-foot buses may not be the way to go, and that you should look at perhaps 1 or 2 or 3 smaller ones, and more trips versus having some vehicles that perhaps the drivers can't handle. Thank you.
Okay. Ryan Doherty, Westminster.
I'm a yes.
Okay. And Amanda Reed, Lunenburg.
I will vote yes with reservations.
Okay. Okay, so that does carry. So we are making the recommendation to the NPO to endorse. I will make sure that at the meeting next week, I give a little bit more detail about the discussion we had. It does pass, so we will make that recommendation. Ultimately, it's up to the NPO to endorse it or not. So, with that being said, before we move on, I'd like to thank everyone for
Did you miss me?
So George, you are a non-voting member. You're an ex officio
Oh,
member.
okay. Very good.
Same with Chelsea and Mass DOT.
Good, thank you.
And I can't remember the last time we took a formal vote with the JTC. So this has been a good exercise, and really appreciate the discussion. And it's important to discuss this type of thing in detail and kind of be more aware of the issues. So thank you to everyone. Okay, with that being said, I'll move on to item number 6. So this is the development of the federal fiscal year 26 through 2030 transportation improvement program. So this is just a heads up. Basically, we'll be beginning the process of looking at our next 5 federal fiscal years, in this case 26 to 2030 of the transportation improvement program. As a reminder, the TIP is a listing of all federal investments in the transportation sector in our region. So the NPO is responsible for putting this federally required document together. Transportation staff at MRPC serve as staff of the NPO, so we're the ones that really put everything together. And the role of the JTC is to review the material and make recommendations to the NPO. So there'll be multiple opportunities over the course of the next several months. If you remember this process, I think everyone here has been around for at least one cycle of this. This takes us through the spring. You can see a tentative schedule we have set here. Staff is in the process of getting updates of some of the projects we have on the tip list. We'll be talking to various project proponents, from design consultants to communities to Mass DOT. We'll get status updates, cost updates on all these projects, and we'll bring information bit by bit back to the JTC every month starting in January, and provide feedback to the NPO. So we'll be looking at reviewing things like the project list, scoring the projects, prioritizing them. Ultimately, when it comes to March, we'll be looking at some scenarios to consider. The NPO does have discretion on project placement within a small section of the highway portion, so that takes up the majority of our discussion. One thing that I'd like to just mention is if that your community has a project, excuse me, on the regional tip, and you have an update on its design or its cost or anything, it would be really nice to have that information. A lot of times we're running around trying to update projects. A number of communities have reached out already: Fitchburg, Clinton, off the top of my head, Harvard, Ashburnham. A number of communities have provided those updates up to this point, but we may be looking for additional information. A lot of this comes down to when the design is ready for the project. So a lot of our discussion come February will be design status, if you remember. But we'll get into all that in the coming months. Ideally, we would have a draft available in April. MPO would send that out for public comment. We'd come back in May and endorse it. So that's the schedule we've been following for probably 5 years, the past 5 years or so, and that's the plan again this year. Again, you'll be given a lot of information over the next several months. I also just as a refresher, and I won't go over these project lists in detail, but I put in the handouts, and I actually just updated this like an hour ago. So if you had a previous version of this, that wasn't the latest, but this is the current active 2025 to 2029 tip. So if you're curious to see what's in there, feel free to look into this. I'll detail this in more detail in January and February. We'll be more aware and comfortable with the information as the process goes on. There's also a transit element. This is put together by Mart. We don't necessarily have a lot of discretion on project placement on this. Obviously, we're part of the process. We'll be reviewing the material and providing feedback to the NPO as well. So that's what's on the horizon over the next several months. It's one of the main, more important things that we do as a group. Once again, just FYI. If there's any questions on this, or if you'd like to review it with me or anyone else, we can set something up. Or if you'd just like to understand the process better, always willing to sit down with members who are interested and try to discuss and figure out where your project is in the process. So is there any questions on the development of the 26 to 30 tip? Let's see.
Brian?
Yep, Sarah.
Yeah, I just want to take this opportunity to remind all the communities that have projects on the current tip, maybe in out years, to just check in with their consultants and, find out if there's going to be any issues or if it's moving along well, because we are going to be looking more closely at all the projects in February and March. So, just checking in with your consultants now is a really good time to start thinking about it.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, and that's very important. And I know, we've already been in discussion with Mass DOT on additional projects to add to the list. And the worst case scenario is a project won't be ready, and we end up not funding anything in the region in a particular year. So the idea is to fully spend out our target allotment. And we'll get into the details on that a little bit more in January and February, but really important to stay on top of your design consultant and also give us updates as well. Okay, so the next on the agenda is the development of the UPWP. So this is similar to the TIP, it's just a heads up. The Unified Planning Work Program. This is basically, as staff, this is the work program related to our main contract that we work off of that basically funds our ability to do all these federally required reports and analysis throughout the year, run the NPO and everything like that. We'll be reviewing this process with the JTC at meetings throughout the spring, much like we will with the TIP. And also we anticipate having room in our budget for solicitation of projects from communities as we have in the past. This is what this handout is really about. There's some examples of past projects that we've carried in our work program, things like intersection studies, safety analysis, transit-related studies, really anything that may be of need to a community we'd consider. And we'll be reviewing those requests as well with the JTC, and again, providing recommendation to the NPO and to staff as well as to what we carry in the next program year. And this is for federal fiscal year 2026, which starts October 1st, 2025. So we start this process way ahead. Are there any questions about the UPWP? One thing I'll also mention is if you plan on submitting a project for our consideration to carry, please submit your project request by February 7th. And Sherry Bean is the point person on this, and her contact information is there as well.
We should also mention that the date on this memo isn't until January, so we have not sent it out to the communities yet. So if you have not received it, don't worry. It will be coming out in a couple weeks.
Okay. Okay, next on the agenda is contract status reports. FTA, we have no update. Regional Transit Authority, George Kahali, do you have anything for an update?
Yes, I do have a couple things. As I mentioned earlier, Mart started new services for Ashby. We start Ashby, Ashburnham to Fitchburg bus route connecting Ashby and Ashburnham and Fitchburg. And the other bus route is connecting Ashburnham with Gardner to the hospital and to the downtown Gardner and shopping centers. And part of that route, also we added Winchendon to Gardner with new services. The other one we have is Westminster to Gardner, servicing elderly and migrant, and the resident of Westminster brings them to shopping centers like Walmart and to the hospital, Henry Haywood Hospital. Also, we added an express route between Fitchburg and downtown Leominster, that it is connecting the two downtown, and it is only less than 20 minutes each way. Hopefully people will start using this bus routes, especially from Ashburnham and Ashby and Winchendon and Westminster. Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions for George? If not, I'll move on to Mass DOT 3C, and this is our update based on our work program, actually. We have just two handouts from some of our partners. The first is from Mass DOT in regards to a virtual public information meeting on vulnerable road user systemic safety project. Basically, MassDOT has been looking into locations on bus stops, on state-owned roadways that safety countermeasures could be implemented quickly. And this is things like upgrading the curbing or the striping or the signage or pedestrian crossing islands, that type of thing, curb extensions. And there's a public meeting Wednesday, December 18th at 6 p.m. Virtually. And the information is in this flyer. There is one location in our region as part of this program. There's been a location identified in Templeton. The information again is in the flyer. Last I have is from the Division of Ecological Restoration. DER is again beginning the process of accepting culvert replacement project inquiries. So this is just an inquiry to schedule a call with DER staff about their project or a possible project on or before before January 10th. I think they did this same thing last year. They're basically giving an opportunity for municipalities to call and ask about the program and get additional information. So the information again is on the handout. That's all I have for updates on that. We'll move on to administrative matters. The next JTC meeting, that would be so the next meeting will be January 8th at 2:30, again remotely. And I'll send out the information on that typically a week before, which falls on the 1st. So I'll probably send it out on the 2nd or the 3rd. That meeting will be we're starting to discuss more in detail the TIP and the UPWP, among other things. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Guy Corbacero.
Second, Laura Schifrin.
Okay, without any discussion, I'll consider that a consensus motion and vote to adjourn, which we'll do. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank